Welcome and good afternoon, everyone. It is our real pleasure to welcome Carmela Troncoso as a keynote speaker for today's event. As many of you know, Carmela, she is a leading voice at the intersection of privacy, security, and society. Indeed, Carmela was the leading scientist behind the DP Treaty, also known as Swiss COVID, or Decentralized Privacy Preserving Proximity Tracing. And in fact, she was named among 40 names under 40 by Forbes for her effort. Carmela is a professor at EPFL, but I believe she's transitioning to MPI to create a group for security and privacy. And she's going to continue working on privacy-enhancing technologies and ethical designs for digital systems. Carmela today is going to talk about one of her recent works about designing humanitarian aid along with Red Cross that she and her team did a great detailed and thorough analysis of their design. And I believe Carmela also showcased a fierce commitment to building technologies for society and respecting human dignity. So welcome, Carmela. The stage is yours.
So I will talk today indeed about our collaboration with the Red Cross that has been ongoing now for a good number of years. This is not a crypto talk. I didn't want to embarrass myself trying to talk crypto to cryptographers. So it's more about the process that we follow and why do we do the work and our design choices and how do we get there. Because at the end of the day, we try to do things that are deployable, so the crypto is not that cool. Only at the very end I have some cool, because things that can be deployed quite fast tend to not be as fancy as we like in research. So all of this started because they came to us and said that, well, they have to do a lot of aid distribution in the field, and an aid distribution typically looks like this. You have a lot of people that come, show you an identity or tell you the name, and then you have a list of paper, and then you try to find their names, and whenever you give them something, you scratch the name from the list so that they don't come back again and you don't give them food again. And this kind of, it works, right? But at the end of the day, is a very slow process, because this thing about looking for names in a list, especially when you're in a country that is not your own country, where people may have a different language, very different kind of naming conventions, is very hard. And when you're in a conflict zone, having a group of people for a long time in a place is actually dangerous, both for the Red Cross as well as for them. It's also error prone, right? This thing about looking at the list and not looking at the list is costly, and it's also very hard to audit. And the Red Cross has a lot of internal auditing, which serves basically for transparency towards the donors, right? And when you have all of these lists of papers with all of these things, and the auditing tends to happen in their headquarters in Manila, it's kind of very hard to take these papers from the middle of Africa and ship them to Manila, right? So all of these things make it complicated, so they have a very strong push for digitalize, and they came to us and asked, like, well, how can we do this thing? And in particular, they have quite some pressure, internal and external, to use biometrics, which is thought about a technology that would actually help here a lot, because you could just have people giving you the biometric and you could accelerate the process. But of course, biometrics is also a very sensitive thing, especially when you have biometrics about people in the state that these people are. So they wanted to know, how can we do it? Okay, so we were like, okay, you have this, recipients go to a distribution extension, there is a list, and if we digitalize, like the main things, like, okay, we just put things in a database, why are you even going to researchers? Just put a MySQL there or any kind of very simple thing, and you're done. Very fast, very clean. You can probably run it even in a Raspberry Pi, and all of this is great. But when you do this in a very straightforward way, this is very risky, because you are going to be collecting a lot of data from these people that are in a very, very sensitive situation, right? And we have evidence that things have not always gone so well. We have the United Nations kind of giving data around. Here in the United States, there is also more and more laws in which refugees have to give data, and any data that they have somewhere at the end of the day they have to reveal. Even if you give it to somebody that very trusted, the Red Cross. A couple of years ago, they had a big hack in which a lot of data was leaked. So you have the data and go. Or we have here, in the latest time that the Taliban got to Afghanistan, a lot of Western companies that had been there with their things flew away and abandoned a lot of computers with a lot of biometric databases that the Taliban actually got and started using to prosecute people. Because when you are in a TV series like CSI, it's very easy to just go and change your face. But if you're a refugee or an activist in Afghanistan, it's not so easy to change your biometrics to try to escape any kind of control. So of course we can just make privacy preserving digitalization. We have here a lot of people working on these kind of topics. And we would just make the database private. I mean, why? What's the problem here? The less data is available, the more privacy we have, right? We just encrypt, we do some fancy crypto, differential privacy, a trusted execution environment, and then we have data confidentiality, and we're done. We have been doing this also kind of for a bit long time, and we know how to do it. But the real question here is this about confidentiality, right? If we need to think about, for instance, the case of these companies leaving databases and full systems in Afghanistan, the fact that the data is confidential would do nothing because they would just get access to the whole system and the confidential data. So it's not really about confidentiality. Like, confidentiality doesn't prevent misuse, which is the thing that we're worried about. Refugees or the Red Cross are very fine using the data for this purpose of giving aid, right? Nobody would complain about this thing. The problem is if this data kind of changes environment, changes place, and is misused in ways that is not good for them. And this is, in general, a more problematic thing that we have in our community, that we have moved this idea of privacy to be data confidentiality, right? And a lot of us, and including myself for many years, we have been doing that privacy is this thing where we hide data, this data minimization kind of thing. But if we go back to the right to privacy, this is Article 12 in the in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and I let you read this thing here for a second. Because this is the thing that appears in the intro of all of our papers, right? And we go and give these speeches about this thing. But do you see the word confidentiality here? Do you see anything about private data? No, because it was never about private data, right? Privacy is not really about protecting data. It's really about protecting people from the consequences of using the data. And if you think about how you use privacy in your daily lives, how you use privacy in the offline life, when you actually decide what to tell to whom, you typically don't hide secrets just for the sake of having data. It's that you don't want to tell some people something that then can come against you, right? When you were young and you were 15, you didn't tell your parents whether you're going to go to the mall, because otherwise they would tell you, no, you cannot go to the mall. If they could let you go to the mall, you would be like, hey, I'm going, right? We are always doing this kind of thing where you don't tell your bosses or people, your colleagues at work different things. It's because you don't want what happens after. It's not the data itself, the thing that we want to process. And this leads me to the fact that we need to change the privacy design paradigm. Okay? We have been working on this idea of data minimization, but actually what we want to do is purpose limitation. This is also another kind of legal term, but what we really need to do is to actually limit the way in which data can be processed, not to hide it, right? We need to build systems in which we minimize how data, the amount of ways in which data can be used, and therefore we limit the risk and the things that can happen afterwards, because not only that the data is secret, it's that the data is in a form that it cannot be reused for something that you didn't want. And I'll give a couple of examples through the talk so that this becomes more clear. But to do this thing, we actually need to know the purpose of the system. And this is kind of the very hard part of the job at the end of the day, right? And how we do this in my lab, and how we do this, and now we have been quite successful in applying it to a number of collaborations with different NGOs, is indeed we kind of determine the purpose of the system by talking to them. We then find what is the minimal data, and then yes, we throw privacy-enhancing technologies at that. We use all of the crypto that you guys make, but we use them not to hide the data, we use them to constrain the system. And we do that through hiding the data. But the goal is kind of a little bit different. And before it was mentioned like these contact tracing apps. And when we were doing that thing, I was at the press all day long talking about privacy because that was the thing that allowed us to engage with society. But the goal of the system that we built was not to hide data. The goal was to build something that could only do one thing, which was kind of doing these matchings to do alarms. If you go back and look at the design, and actually we were so sure of what he had done that the database that we built was public. If you remember, these applications would take these codes and upload them to a server that had a host. You could go to the host and take the data because it was impossible to do anything else with it. It was not the data was private, it's that the possibilities of misuse were zero. And that was the actual goal of the design. But we could not explain this to the people like this because they would not care. But if you tell them privacy, then they cannot cut it. So the question is, how do we determine the purpose of the system, right? And this is a lot about talking to the right people. In the case of the Red Cross, we talk to the Data Protection Office that knows about data management policies, about compliance, but we also talk to the program managers, the ones that are going to use the things in the field, and to field employees that actually do the aid distribution. And through the years, I have learned that typically the things that we would do, like as a cryptographer, right, it's a very computer science, you're like, okay, what do you want? What do I need to build? Yeah? What is the thing that you need? And they will tell you, if you're asking what you want, they will tell you everything. And post-quantum and, and a unicorn that sings at night. And you're like, yeah, sure. And if you ask what do you need, also what they tell you is what we have now, right? This thing that I have now, including my computer, my user interface and everything, but private and digital. And this is very problematic because then they think that what they do is how they do it. But this is not actually true. In many cases, we just do things, especially once you put computers in the middle, in the way that the API allows you to do it. Yeah, I don't know how many times, this problem for me started at university, where I could go to the university office and ask them, oh, I need a certificate of this particular thing because now I'm going to Belgium, and they would do, we cannot do this. And I'm like, what do you mean you cannot do it? You just take these 3 courses that I took and you put them on a paper, you stamp them, but there's no button, right? Because life becomes about how we do things instead of what we're trying to do. So we stopped asking that question because it led us nowhere, and we ask people, what do you do in your day? We ask them to tell us, what do they do? How do they do? Okay, so in a day distribution, you go to the table in the morning, you go with your list, you sit there, people come, give you an ID. So they start to tell you all of those things, and from these things, we actually extract the functionality. We take that upon us to actually extract what is it that they need. And we do this by extracting it from the conversation we have with them and from asking more and more questions and asking them to unpack. Like sometimes they tell you, and then I go back, or I scratch the thing from the list. Like, why do you scratch it from the list, right? So that you can get why are they doing things, because that would lead you about what is it that you need, what is the thing that you need to replicate. Because it's not the program, not the process. You need to replicate what is the essence that they need to do. This is also very important because it doesn't constrain you, again, to this system that they already have. Especially when we talk about privacy technologies, and a lot of the fancy criteria we have is very unintuitive for people. People don't know that we can do zero knowledge, because you cannot do zero knowledge in normal life. People don't know that we can do homomorphic commitments, right? That we can have zero knowledge proofs about something that then you can add and encrypt the domain, and that thing that doesn't even enter their minds. So if you just ask them to produce a system for you, they will never get to the same point that we would actually get. Yes?
I know that it might not be the case in this specific case scenario, but if they do not know what actually they do today, but they just heard the term privacy and they just want to bring privacy, but they have no idea, what would be the right approach for them?
It's the same thing. You just don't ask them. You ask them, here you're trying to know what the system you're going to build, what should it do? So you need to ask them, okay, what should it do? What do you do? So you can replicate something that allows them to do the same job. Right? So far, we have not gotten to the privacy way here. But this is just that by asking these questions, you open your design space much more than if you just kind of try to replicate or to throw some privacy technologies at the process that they have. Of course, there are deployment constraints, and so far you cannot kind of go very far because you have to deal with legacy. And yeah, legacy is not simple to deal with, but still it opens the thing. And also you will learn much more about the system itself and about the kind of the boundaries where you should design and the boundaries where you should just kind of integrate yourself in the whole process. Extremely important for adoption. And actually this is something that I learned a lot about with the contact tracing apps, because we were not very good at doing that at that time, right? And we really kind of made a big intervention on doctors' processes. They didn't like it. And that was one of the main reasons why the apps didn't have more adoption, because there was a lot of friction actually with different people, because we didn't play well the game. Well, also we didn't have time, right? Back then, pandemic and stuff. But that is also very, very helpful to just talk with them and learn about how the life is, so that you can design something that would enter more seamlessly in their life and not fully change how they work. And then comes the next thing, which is the threat modeling, right? Because you're asking, like, okay, what's the threat model? And if you also go and ask people what's your threat model, like, yeah, exactly. People are very bad at this thing. People are, even us, we're very bad at these things. I mean, our papers, we break our papers all the time because we don't get the threat model right. But even people out there, right? And I see this when I teach, that my computer security class and my privacy class are mostly about threat modeling. That's kind of at the end of the day the essence. And the guys are very bad. Like I have 300 students per year, and it takes time, right, to teach them this thing. So actually, if you go there, right, the data protection officers will talk to you about the privacy regulations, because that's what they care about. The program managers will tell you about armed militias, which is good, at least that's good in their model. And the field employees will tell you, like, guy, people are dying. Why are you talking about a threat model, right? They are just like, why are you here? Like, what is this thing? So we have also stopped talking about these things, and we kind of asking, like, who might interact with the system? And then we learn about a lot of these things, like people that have, and also through this dialogue that we have, in which we ask them what they do through the day, you slowly start learning about the kind of things that they interact with, and also the kinds of things they fear. Because also when they tell you, when you ask them a question, oh, and then at the end of the day, why do you take these papers and put them in a box? And they tell you, oh, yeah, maybe because there's a militia. They tell you all of those things, but they will not think about them to start with. That you need to just figure them out by talking to them. And also we think about, and all of these things, why the information can be there, right? What kind of information? And you also learn a lot about this from when they tell you how they interact with the people in the field. Then you start learning what information they need to use. And when they tell you, oh, I go and scratch because I look at this list here and here, or like a lot of these things appear, and all of these things, I mean, other of these things we also learn from actually documentation and things that they have, but that's how we build. And then we try to build a way of, from this information, if it is available to different parties, what would be the harms that would happen to people? And I'm not talking about here what can be revealed, yeah, that's how we think about it, but mostly what is the harms, which we learn, again, both from documentation of the Red Cross, where they have a lot of these things written down, things that they try to avoid, as well as when you talk with them. And from their speech, you can derive this kind of information. And then once we have all of this thing, we start thinking about, okay, now that we know the purpose and now we know this information, which information would I actually need? And we find out that some of this information you must have in the system, and some of this information must leave the system as well. It's the output on the system. And this happens with anything we have, because we don't have systems of Schrödinger that kind of do something and don't do it at the same time. So for instance, in data distribution, we actually, like the people that distribute goods need to know which goods to give. Huh? I cannot tell them, okay, I cannot tell you, make an oblivious transfer. Okay, that's not happen. This is not possible in the field. So some of these things is actually fundamental information leakage, and that means that the system has a fundamental risk that comes with deployment. And that is already a very important thing, because these harms happen regardless of the instantiation. And this is the first conversation that now we have with our partners to ask them, well, these are the risks that we have. Do you want to deploy this or not with Humanitarian, normally the answer is yes, right? They do something that's so important that, well, they need to take a lot of risks. But when we're thinking about many other things that are not in the humanitarian sector, this is a very good exercise, because normally it tells you also a little bit that some purposes, we should just not build them, probably. It's not about privacy, it's like the purpose itself is harmful. And the other nice thing about this thing is that information, you don't need to protect it anymore, because you know it is going to leak. And that also kind of relaxes a little bit your constraints, because typically as computer scientists, we would just try to hide as much as possible and throw as much crypto everywhere that we can. But some of this information will just go away, right? Or some of this information we don't need to protect because it will happen anyway. So I many times also get the question about, in the case of the aid distribution, well, so what about if somebody goes and then steals the credentials from the people? And you're like, I mean, really, do you think you're going to steal the credentials from the people because they want their food? No, they're just going to go later on once they have the food and steal the food. So I'm not going to bother with that problem. Like, I don't need to do these things. Again, we are in these boundaries of what we build and we don't build, because if we actually try to protect from all of that, we're not going to build something that anybody can deploy. We're going to be overprotecting and not performant. And then indeed, for any other leakages, we're trying to have crypto and privacy-enhancing technologies to help us. So this was our first system, where we kind of did the first analysis of a lot of those things, and we learned how they worked. We took months to talk with them, to have internal conversations. And then afterwards, once we were kind of sure, we still have always weekly interactions with the teams to make sure that the things that we design still kind of respond to them. Weekly, bi-weekly, depends on the time. But we never spend too much time kind of apart from them, because we're very scared of going up on our ivory tower and again kind of missing the point, right? And it's very important, because when you talk back, the other thing that happens is that when you present back somebody a design, it's going to tell you, oh, but it doesn't do B. And you're like, yeah, but you didn't tell me about B. And like, yeah, well, we need B as well, right? So you need this interaction all the time. Otherwise, you will always build something that doesn't work. So how this works, at the end of the day, they have 3 phases. We have a registration phase, which typically is per household. And this was also a surprise for us, because we always think about giving aid to people, but it's very common, it's the most common form of aid is actually giving aid to families or groups of families that live in the same household. And the entitlement that they have depend on the situation of the family. Do they have kids? Do they have elderly? Do they have sick persons? And all of those things. And that is kind of very interesting. Then they make typically periodic distributions or not, that depends, but in many places they do periodic distributions, because unfortunately wars and conflicts last for a long time, so it's not a one-day thing. And the idea is that they want to give legitimate recipients, and they want to avoid double dipping. And they want to avoid double dipping both because they need to show that to their donors, but also because that's how they can offer the most help possible if they use the results efficiently. And at the end, as we said, we need an audit, so we need to provide some kind of proof of distribution that can be used to build these reports that are essential for them to continue receiving money and do their job. So here, kind of at the end, you can have some, I mean, it's a little bit bigger than this, but this I wanted to give some summary that kind of helps you understand a little bit how was the process. So the registration must know the mapping from household to entitlement, because when you go and register, they need to note down this thing in some way. How they do this, it depends very much on different places. In some deployments, actually there is a registry, an official registry. In some deployments, it doesn't, and you actually need to go the social way. In some places, you actually have the elder of the village that actually says, this family needs this, that family needs that. Like, they have different authorities and they need to accommodate by themselves. So this is something that we didn't kind of intervene, again, in these boundaries with the human. This is not a problem that we solve. This is a problem that they know how to solve. The distribution, as we said, they might not have entitlement to deliver, otherwise, what are they going to give to people? And the audit must actually know the total distribution, because the donors don't care if I gave to Josh 1 bread and to Melissa 1 rice. They want to know, this is all the things I gave, and I gave them to actually legitimate recipients, and there was no cheating involved. And then the distribution and the audit, typically they don't want to trust them with too much information, not because they are not super trusted, just because they can be compromised. A lot of distributions don't happen only by Red Cross employees. They have a lot of people from local that work in there. And in the audit, as we saw before, sometimes data is lost, right? So if they don't need data, it's better that they don't have it, and then you kind of avoid problems. Least privilege principle, kind of, they actually kind of do it quite well. And then we also have a series of deployment requirements that also make this problem very challenging and very different to the kind of things that we typically design on our papers. So low cost, and by low cost doesn't mean, oh, they only have 1 gigabyte. Right. No, low cost means that you really need to go super low cost because they need to be able to deploy these things very fast in whatever place, that there is very little to no connectivity. You cannot assume that stations can talk with each other, they can do multi-party computation, all of these things don't happen. Mid-scale, we don't need to have scales of millions of people and millions of transactions. Typical deployments are from the few hundreds to the few thousands. Rarely they have a deployment that they have hundreds of thousands, right? If you look at the distribution of the numbers, typically are kind of what we would call mid-scale, or maybe even the smallest scale for the kind of crazy crypto that we have. And we also want robustness of distribution, this meaning that we don't want a distribution to depend on one person in the household, because if that person cannot go there, we need to be able to give it to other people in the household. And that is very interesting when they said this thing about household, because when they came for us with these biometrics, and then suddenly we discovered that distributions were per household, it's like, then biometrics cannot help us, right? Because if I just keep your biometric, but then somebody else from the household can come, that doesn't allow me to duplicate aid. So this thing is just not useful at all, and you should not even be using them. Yes?
Is it safe to assume that this deployment will not require like a big company like Microsoft or Google or any other big company? You will be able to, just Red Cross hosting some like mid-scale servers or something like that, or?
We hope that it doesn't require anybody doing anything. That's also very important. I mean, maybe I should have put this here, which is also independence, right? The Red Cross needs to maintain and wish to maintain their independence as much as they want. More my words than theirs, but it's not necessarily that they need things. And actually, the idea that you're going to have a big server, right, is in many places crazy. All of the things that we're building here, you can actually put them on a Raspberry Pi and take them with you.
And the cost on the Red Cross will be very low then?
Yes.
Like monetary cost.
Yeah, and that's also as well, because like most of the money, they want to use them on medicines, on food, on like money on the infrastructure. That's a lot of money that they have to justify to donors, and that doesn't work that well. You had a question, man.
I'm wondering if distribution and audit cannot be trusted. Is there any root of trust in the system? So which part of the system is trusted?
So actually not much. Right? I'll show you how we kind of decentralize for this thing. The only thing that we kind of consider that is honest is the registration in kind of giving good registrations, because if we have a malicious registrations that refuses to register people, or that, then we cannot distribute. So you have to make that assumption, because otherwise the thing crumbles down. You just cannot build it. It's very easy, but the paper is rejected. It's a trivial result. So what we did, here we built a couple of systems, one based on smart cards, one based on bring your own device if people have smartphones. In some deployments, that's actually the case. In many deployments, it's not the case. People don't have smartphones, let alone smartphones or phones that can do any kind of anything. So we just took smart cards, like very cheap, things that you can buy by less than €1, a few cents, and depends on what. And our system works when you go to the registration station. They will give you a card that has symmetric key for the household, a copy of your entitlement, a counter for the period, if you have a periodical thing, and we put an authentication based on biometrics, because that's what they ask, and also because at the end of the day, donors like it. Some people in the field actually like that they are digitalizing in a way, and we could include this at the end in an easy way. But this is our database, and our database is decentralized. Everybody has a card with their own role, right? So it is impossible to actually lose the database, or if somebody kind of takes this from you, first, it's a smart card, they cannot extract it. Second, the very sensitive thing, if they have your card and they have your 10 fingers, so there's no need for actually doing this. And then when you go to the distribution station, you can prove to the card that you are yourself. We need the reader. We would be assuming actually honesty from the reader. Same thing, otherwise we cannot play. If you don't want biometrics and you can use other stuff, maybe you don't need that. But then you authenticate to the card, and the card tells the distribution station, hey, yeah, this person needs 3 bags of rice and 1 bottle of milk. And also gives what we call the tag, which is just a hash, keyed hash with your secret key and the period. So all of the cards of one household will always output the same tag, and this is how we do double dipping. By just outputting this thing, if somebody else comes, you will detect that you already have the tag. And we also have a signature, just a plain digital signature on everything that the card outputs. This is to prove that you are a legitimate recipient because you have a card from the Red Cross that can sign things like this. And then we also add an amorphic commitment of the entitlement that we use at the very end to sum and give this global sum to the auditor without them needing to see anything else. So at the end of the day, this is the database. And the thing about this, the database is that it's very similar to the database that we built when we build the contact tracing apps, which is a bunch of random numbers. Like essentially, you can have this in a Raspberry Pi with 0 security because it gives 0 information. There is nothing here that can be used for anything that is not this double dipping prevention and these homomorphic commitments. But these are the 2 things that we said, okay, they need to be known, right? And even if you would think about the homomorphic commitments, we said we would reveal to the auditor, but if you're actually a militia that is gonna go and see, you can also see how much food was in the warehouse and how much food is after, you can also get this information. It's not something that is super secret. So this is something that, yeah, cannot be repurposed, right? We not only design something that hides all the information, we also hide something that we cannot reuse in any way, and it cannot be turned back on the recipients of aid. And this is a lot because the people building this, which is the Red Cross, they are also not adversarial, right? They will actually keep the function all the time. They will not change. There will not be any kind of function creep where at some point the function changes and asks for more things or makes more proofs, because the Red Cross has no interest on doing that. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you have a mechanism for card revocation and replacement in case of loss.
Yes, there is the whole thing in the paper. But we have this thing because also for the robustness, you actually need people lose their cards, right? So we can make copies, we can make all of those things.
So you have enough information to revoke and replace, in addition to what you are showing us.
So for the revocation, we actually use blacklistable credentials. Well, nowadays they're called something else. And you can have the list and kind of check that things are not expired. In the case of this one, you just can keep you can revoke the tags, for instance, and have a list where you just check that the things are not work linearly. That's also why we can only have mid-size deployments, because you cannot have super huge revocation lists. Otherwise, it doesn't work. But yes, and for the copies of the card, we also have a mechanism to do secure copies of the card or secured issuance of a credential for the same family.
Yeah, so I'm not a crypto person. Maybe this is obvious to other people. So what to prevent malicious parties from fabricating entries in this table? Can you arbitrarily add an entry to look like you distributed more than you actually did?
So for that, you would need to have the distribution station, the registration station kind of giving you a card. Yeah. And again, we'll go back. If the registration station wants to register ghost people, then we lose. We lose. Like that is a bit of the, and I understand, like, from a security perspective, it's a little bit unsatisfactory, but in reality, this is what it is. Like if you lose from the beginning, then you lose at the end. But if in the beginning the registration station didn't give extra cards, then people can only ask for aid, one per period, and only legitimate people can do by the signatures. Yep.
I'm a little surprised at the reduction here, because it seems like a lot of the work is focused on the registration part, which I know it's out of your scope, but that seems like that's really, I mean, we can't manage anything close to that in the US. So I'm surprised that that seems to be possible in a war zone where there is no infrastructure.
That the registration is honest.
Yeah.
That's the assumption they have nowadays. We also didn't add any new assumption, right? In that sense, again, in these boundaries of what we fix and what we don't fix, this is what it is. And then, yeah, if you have that, as I said, but then also there is nothing that anybody can do, right? If you start by a list that is, or like if you start with a list of voters that have a lot of dead people, then you have extra votes and there is nothing that can help you.
I guess I'm just surprised that that is considered possible, because that seems like a really hard problem that...
No, I think that what I'm trying to say here is that there's a problem that we cannot solve, right? That if they are in that case, then they are going to have... But the most that they can prove is something against the list, assuming that the list is honest. And this is as much as we can do.
I guess if an honest list can't be built, then this work doesn't do anything. So there's a hard thing there, and I'm just surprised that an honest enough list can be built.
That you have to talk with them about that.
May I ask, just because I'm curious now, so I believe you also manage like reduction is kind of the forgeability of signatures and like there's a key management part, I guess, right? When you say honest registration, there's still a management of a key which signs and which creates the commitments and types and all, right? So is that still surprising you? Because this type of registration is...
No, it's not.
It's not the list. It's like you can have a list that you can trust.
It's not the key management. I mean, we can't build a voter registration list in the U.S. that's anywhere close to right. So, you know, a list of people actually getting aid, what they're entitled to.
So you have different ways of they build these things. So sometimes actually, as I said, they have a list. Sometimes they actually go door to door and they build the list themselves. Now, if you trust yourself to do that, if you don't trust, and then people would add more things, then yeah, you lose. And then we did this thing, and then they came with this fact of, oh, well, that doesn't do everything, right? Because they came and they say, well, you know, sometimes we actually, in our deployments, we don't do this thing about giving 3 boxes of rice. We actually give people some cash or some vouchers that they can use locally in the thing, in their village. So we built kind of an extension in which we went from these fixed entitlements to wallets. We still had this very low cost kind of requirement, which actually meant that we still need to have our smart cards, and that kind of ruled out a lot of super fancy crypto. We still have kind of people not having connectivity, so synchronization of the wallet must be done decentralized. So we do this by the card being the one kind of bringing information from different vendors to the others. The card is a TE. Again, if we don't have a TE in our hands, we cannot do this thing. Root of trust. I don't know who asked before about the root of trust. We have a, I think it was just the trick. We have one, right? The card. And also now privacy and the audit include vendors. You have more people around. So this system is a little bit more expensive, a bit more complicated. And we solve it by using an ORAM to have vendors keep kind of the database. And as I said, the card is the recipient is the one that synchronizes it using the card. And when they go to a vendor, they kind of get their state from the vendor in an oblivious way. And then they re-update it and they leave an amorphic commitment as a proof of payment. And all of this can be reconciled at the end to give the money to the vendors and to do a bunch of stuff. You can go and read the paper to believe me that this works. We also work a little bit in this registration side, because the other thing that they said, well, sometimes what would be actually nice is that on registration we can have the duplication of people. And then biometrics actually did make sense, because that's what actually biometrics is good at. Not at the distribution, no, bad idea. But here, yes. So we built a system in which we would use biometrics in a privacy-preserving way, trying to not build this kind of databases. having just a 1-bit output of the circuits, we could tell you this person was registered or not, but not anything else, to actually can again minimize the information. We build it still with very low cost and not connectivity, only a little bit of connectivity, because some things also you cannot do. And this is something that is also very valued in this collaboration, when sometimes we tell them, well, some things you cannot do securely if you put so many constraints, right? If you can never ever connect to Geneva, then you cannot do this part. And we also build here a kill switch by actually having the headquarters in Geneva do kind of multi-party protocols with the registration stations to actually activate some of these checks, to not fall into the trap of this Taliban problem in Afghanistan, that we would have a biometric database and then you can kind of check against it and use it as an oracle. So we have a way of actually eliminating this, and we just build different solutions that are more or less expensive, depending also on what's going to be your trust model and what capabilities you have in your deployment. And then we went to them and we went to all of these things very nice, and it's like, this is great, right? But it's very great to have this thing, but sometimes they need to know more things about the distribution, which that actually didn't have come out in our conversations, because we ask about the distribution until they deliver the goods, but we didn't ask what happens afterwards. But afterwards happens like what happens in any process and any and distribution, that you need to know, how did it go? Do I need more of A? Do I need more of B? Did I actually give help to the people that I wanted? Did I have discrimination? This is also very important for some donors that actually want to make sure that you give a lot to children, or that you give a lot to particular minorities. So we now have another work in which we put these privacy-preserving assessment capabilities. And this happens a lot, right? The privacy-preserving systems do need assessments, whether it is for correctness, whether it is for transparency in our case, or for planning, which is also our case, but happens, for instance, the Tor network has a lot of actual measurements of the network because they need to know how to dimension themselves, right? And there is a bunch of research in the last 10 years helping Tor getting better and better, kind of more accurate measurements without breaching the privacy of the users, which is what Tor does. So, well, we had this system, right, where we had this registration station, then you could get a card, this thing, and now the kind of assessments that they want, on the one hand, would be this thing that allowed them to write reports, which is what percentage of pregnant people had aid, right? So that you can go back to make these reports about knowing where your aid went, making sure that you actually did help communities that you wanted to help. But they also have sometimes they want to know more information, and this is to actually support their duty of care. So they say when we do a deployment, actually, and this is one of these periodic deployments, you end up knowing everybody. And when somebody doesn't show up for 2 or 3 distributions, then they actually go to their house and check, are you okay? And they said, you now, with all of this database, very nice, but you remove our capability to actually take care of the people we want to take care of. So they wanted to do this. Now, this took us a while also to want to do it, because this, as you see, is kind of a slippery slope in which we build a lot of privacy to then now start giving it drop by drop to people. And that's not very nice, because function creep, hello. And but anyway, they kind of said that these kind of things were very important for deployment. So, well, in the computation, we assumed that distribution station had a laptop, a Raspberry Pi, something. And here, for 8 recipients, we ended up having to have something a bit bigger than a smart card, because we were not able to crypto that could run on a smart card. Or maybe we should try harder to fit it on a smart card. And then, for 8 recipients, we say don't have connectivity, but for the stations, as before, we kind of enable a little bit, right? If you can kind of once a month use this thing with a satellite link, and you don't have that much computation, and maybe the computation takes like 1 hour or 2 hours, which is something that you cannot do on distribution, but you can afford to do this once in a while to compute your statistics. Because on the distribution, as I said, it needs to be fast, right? And to go back to the beginning of my presentation, one of the goals of digitalization is to make the distribution agile. If we now have to wait 1 minute to give every packet, then we're kind of destroying everything we did. And then I would go to them and say, no, go back to the paper because you were doing much better. And the kind of things that we need is that we need statistics that is accurate. And this is very interesting that it's accurate because well, in the paper, we have a section that says we can use differential privacy. It was because reviewer B couldn't live without differential privacy. But the Red Cross actually doesn't like it because they cannot give to donors a report with noise and explain that no worries, epsilon is no, right? Again, like what is it? Like, did you give help or not, right? This is not, that cannot be. But, so they need something accurate, and also we want that only the statistics, right? And that will be a key our fundamental leakage. And this is the place where this was very hard to swallow for me, because this is a lot of fundamental leakage when you allow these kind of things, but you need them, right? Because this is the purpose of now this system, is to provide assessments. And assessments are about giving more information than what you had. And because we're doing something so dangerous, then we added 2 requirements. One of them was the agility, the idea that, okay, because we're gonna now also do something more complicated, it's gonna be more expensive. Therefore, this phone instead of the smart card. And if we want perfect privacy, we're gonna have to make it super, super expensive. So we said, okay, we can maybe kind of reduce the threat model, have more honest but curious around the place that allow us to make this thing in a way that we can actually deploy it in a reasonable way. But we know that these things kind of may change very much, because maybe in a place actually the Red Cross has their own deployment with no external people, and then we can say they're honest but curious and everybody's very happy, but maybe one day they need to delegate. Or maybe they were delegating and they were kind of still in the honest but curious, but maybe one day the militia comes and takes over, right? And then what do you do? So we wanted to have a threat model in which we could actually either increase protection or deactivate, like the kill switch they had before, in which, in a way, you could stop, like remotely, you could stop the production of statistics, right? Again, by adding these headquarters kind of involved in this end loop. And also, a kind of grateful degradation means that when the threat model increases, you can still bound the leakage that you will have, right? That they cannot, the system does not catastrophically fail. You can say, okay, even if now they can do this thing, I still know, well, they would learn more than before, but they will not learn like everything in the database. And the designs are made for that. And we used functional encryption. Just so we encrypt kind of attributes, and then we allow functional encryption to compute functions on these attributes, if that makes sense to you guys. But when we look at the functional encryption at the first time, we're like, okay, but if you have functional encryption and all of the inputs, you just can do the Oracle thing and kind of reconstruct the database by just asking all of possible different equations, right? So what we built, well, we built, and what I mean, this thing is my student Christian built this thing. My crypto fool, not even close to do this. He built a one-time functional encryption, which adds a tag to the encryption in such a way that the system will not decrypt twice. So there, the distribution station, if it becomes malicious, only gets one shot to decrypt, right? Cryptography, you can go and read the paper. Also, you only gave me 45 minutes. And then we have a malicious version in which we also add a binding to actually the inventory, so that if somebody is malicious and is trying to do to retrieve more information or to add more encryptions to kind of be able to do attacks in which they can reduce in a way the anonymity set of people, this would actually be detected at the audit state, because you kind of can see that the goods were not given because you have a binding to the actual physical that we have. We have instantiations in every way, and still we wanted to write, and we wrote on the paper that now, because you're building this thing, you still have more problems. You're giving more information, and that can bring more issues and more risk to be taken into account. We have a bunch of extensions that increase a little bit the complexity, but actually help. So one is the kill switches, as we were saying. We have thresholding, so you can actually do this functional encryption, but only give an answer if enough people have appeared. So if you were asking, okay, am I distributing enough people of the LGBTQ community, you can say only when more than 10 are, so that you cannot identify particular people, so that we are not allowing targeting by statistics by having very small projects. And we also have some statistics for malicious recipients if they would like to mangle with the statistics. I'm already on the takeaways. So humanitarian digitalization brings requirements that are very different, right? All of this no connectivity, all of these balances with different balances with security and privacy, all of these trust assumptions. A lot of the things we have here are not the typical things that we read on conferences when we want to do privacy-preserving computation on the cloud or for Signal to get knowledge of the contacts. The world is very, very different when we go and talk with these guys, both the purpose that they have and the constraints in which this has to be built. Protecting recipients requires rethinking this privacy-preserving design from this data minimization, right, from just let me hide to actually let me build systems that cannot be reused. Like a lot of the things, again, I talked today are really about constraining the ways in which the data that is in the system can be used, not only limiting the amount of data flows. And learning purposes and threat modeling is a key step to be able to do this in a way that both is actually truly useful for the populations you're trying to work for, as well as to really protect them, right? And also to be able to do the design in a way that is deployable, as I was saying, by learning all of these little things about what's the fundamental leakage that I need to protect, which are the parts that I don't need to build because I need to assume that it is like this. And you can only do that by talking to them. Like if you just do it from your desk, this is not going to work. And also, when you're building such a complex system and you're talking about privacy and constraining, it is much easier to get to a very minimalistic design if you start very small and you keep building on it than if you try to just from the beginning take everything and remove stuff. And this is also why we started building by this very small one and kind of adding, because every time we add, we also have a reference about what would be the minimal kind of leakage, how much are we adding. And a thing that I do very often with humanitarian organizations in particular, that sometimes they come to me and they say, oh, we want to digitalize this thing. And then we go and think about all of this fundamental leakage, what are the crypto primitives we have. And sometimes I just tell them, look, we cannot help you. Like, I mean, what you need to do has so much fundamental leakage. We can go and build the design. We're going to write a paper. My students are going to be super happy. S&P is going to maybe give us an award. But at the end of the day, don't do it, right? You're going to spend a lot of time, a lot of money, and to gain this with respect to your fundamental leakage, just don't do it. Don't deploy it. Go like this, have the risk, save people, right? And analyzing in this way makes it very easy to make this kind of adjustments and kind of give this feedback to them about what are the points where digitalization actually makes sense or privacy makes sense, and what are the points where it is very fun, but saving life is much more important. And this is all I had to say. I hope it was interesting. Thank you for your questions and your time.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
So some of the guarantees, like the kill switch and stuff like that, they're really nice, but they sort of they're probably not consumable or believable by the recipients of the aid or the people distributing, right? So, like, how much do people just is the anticipation that people will just interact as though those guarantees were not in place, right? Because if I have no chance of understanding how your kill switch actually works and how the technology works, am I really just going to assume that any information I give will be, will be leaked?
Okay, these my words are not the Red Cross or anything. So, in general, people do not understand no matter what. right? The moment that we tell them we're going to do all of this crap, I mean, it doesn't matter, right? They go also and take the help of some other humanitarian organizations that put all the data on the blockchain. And they tell you, yeah, we have data minimization of all records of refugees in the blockchain because they need food and they need blankets and they need medicine. So that is not really something where the end user kind of is so involved. So what they believe is not very... Now, the people at the distribution station is indeed much more problematic, how safe they feel in that sense. And I cannot give you an answer. This is a user study that we actually want to run. But then after doing all of this, I had my second child and then I moved countries and I didn't have time to do user studies yet. But this is hopefully coming in the next year because I'm actually very interested about this thing. What is the buy-in or how is this understanding and how do we explain actually this in a way that people engage and especially we make them feel safer, because if they don't feel safer then...
Yeah, I mean, it seems like some guarantees, whether you understand it or not, are just uniformly good. It's better than it would have been otherwise, right?
Yeah.
Whether you understand it or not.
Yeah, but even how we understand it or how we explain them in a way that are understandable, I think is very important because I think it does change how people do their job. But this is a very good question and I don't have an answer yet. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for the great talk. I just wanted to go back to the high-level, message you talk about in the beginning, limited purposes. I'm wondering how much dynamics going on in terms of defining the threat model and purpose in the first place. So one thing that drew my attention when I was thinking about a hospital system that's very limited access control because during emergency, doctors need to access those files, with very minimal restrictions, right? And then after the event, they can be asked questions of why you need to access this weird file that nobody accessed, right? I'm wondering in this situation, how easy it is or how hard it is to define those minimum columns of data that's needed, because maybe in the future, that information is really needed, and whether it is to be able to add it back to the system.
That's a very good question. And in here also, that's where we started with this particular kind of system, when we talk with them, right? There is another system that they have, which is one of the other big missions that they have is to reunite families. And there is a lot of these cases in which, indeed, they collect a lot of information, they make a lot of interviews, and you are much more into this health environment in which you want all of the information because you don't know what is the thing that will kind of click later on. And then you cannot do as much minimization indeed. And I don't know what the solution to that is. But I think, to me, the very important thing at that point is also to tell them, again, you have to run with the risk, right? You cannot do this without the risk because your purpose itself your purpose is risky. And then there are some of the, I don't know, we have started kind of exploring this thing, but I don't know that we can do that much at this level of this very cute minimization. Maybe we can do much more at the more kind of, as you said, security would be much more traditional security, much more than the privacy engineering kind of things that we're doing here. But that's a very good question. And to me, a lot of these things is really that also by thinking in this way, we're going to be it's going to be much easier for us to be honest in the sense of saying we should not do it, or we should run with the risk, right? Like calling this privacy preserving is kind of a little bit of privacy washing, because at the end, there is nothing in here that I actually have made privacy or I had actually constrained in any way, because indeed the information needs to be there. And if it needs to be there, it is fine. And then the discussion should be the other one, which is, should we have the system or not, rather than what protection should we embed on it. And to me, this is a much more healthy discussion to have. Again, in the humanitarian, it's kind of always easy to say, yes, we should. In the commercial environment, maybe many more times we should actually have this discussion rather than being discussing which is the epsilon we're going to put or who's going to be running homomorphic encryption and whatever.
Okay, any more questions? Last 1 minute. Otherwise, I'm going to ask my question. So thank you, Carmela, again. I have a question which is kind of occupying my mind related to AI. I know that this has nothing to do with AI, and indeed you really looked at the digitalization of the certain systems that doesn't have any technology involved. But what are your thoughts or your research directions in terms of AI, society, and privacy? Do you have any agenda?
So what we tend to do there is also try to bring honesty a bit to the conversation by taking a critical look at claims that people make on technology, right? Like a big one is like synthetic data is the panacea for everything. It's privacy preserving, it solves biases. So we just go one by one and try to give, well, a more real view of what it is, because then we say like, okay, synthetic data does not give you any privacy. It may bring some advantages. So far I haven't found known, but at least we should be having the conversation about, well, what are the advantages or not that we have. And we're mostly nowadays also trying to get more into the impossibility result kind of thing, because I have found that just doing attacks doesn't work very well in the policy table, because the companies just say, oh, but I'm not exactly in that attack. So now we just kind of cover classes of attacks so that they can say, well, you're still in the realm of bullshit, so no. But yeah, and in terms of minimization, so far, any results that we have been having shows that AI and minimization is not a thing, right? It works by having data. So if we want to have it, then we need to have the data. Okay. And repurposing, it is almost impossible also to prevent repurposing.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So let's give another round of applause for Carmela.
Thank you.
Thank you.